Hi, I'm so glad you're here. My special guest is Eric Pfeiffer today, and he has had such an impact on my husband and I's lives. And so I'm so glad I get to share him with you today. And as we talk about the three phases of burnout, I really want you to pay attention to this cool moment during the third phase where Eric talks about reconciliation and how he went about doing that. I really think it's a powerful takeaway that you won't want to miss. So keep a listen for it, and I hope you enjoy.
Hi, welcome to Fortify and Grow podcast. This is Krystal Burke, and today our topic is the three phases of burnout. And I asked Eric Pfeiffer to come on today as our special guest. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I've actually known Eric for, I was thinking about it, it's like 20 years, Eric. I feel like we're getting very old now, but Eric and his wife, Candy, were actually, my husband and I, we went to a church during our college years, and they were our college pastors. So they really walked with us and were mentors in our lives during that season of dating and engagement and marriage. And man, yes, we definitely needed you in those seasons, because to maneuver those they're hard and challenging. And I'm so glad that you were there. So, and over those years, we became friends. So it's really fun to have you here today, because I feel like I have gained so much wisdom from you, and now I get to share you with all my listeners. So glad you're
I'm
here.
so glad, and I'm happy to be shared.
Yeah, it's fun. So Eric is also an author and the founder of MPWR Coaching, which is Empower Coaching. And he, along with his team, offer leadership development and business coaching to all leaders all over the country. So he has a lot of really good wisdom to share with us today. Okay, so let's jump in to the first phase of burnout. And I don't know if you have like terms for these. I came up with my own based on my experience. And so the first one I call just push through phase, because I think during this phase of burnout is when we're kind of just trying to push through. We're ignoring these signs of burnout that I think it's hard to understand, really, because you don't know if it's just stress or if you're headed to burnout. And so some of them are, like you're trying to rest and you still feel exhausted when you wake up, using alcohol or coffee to kind of like get through the day. You start to feel like life's running away without you. You avoid friendships, unable to switch off at the end of the day and calm down. You feel like agitated or angry. And then also a lot of anxiety and depression can really set in during that time. Did you have any of these signs for you as you were experiencing burnout that you ignored during this time?
Yes, all of the above, and I'm sure many other indicators that I was ignoring. In our last conversation, I remember sharing with you that I think, I'm sure everybody deals with this to some level, but the more ambitious, passionate, driven we are, I think it becomes that much easier to sidestep those indicators as that's not a big deal. I'm sure nobody else is experiencing this. And then I think there's also the internal fear of like, am I alone? Is this weird? Am I a bad person? Am I broken? Is there something wrong with me? And the fear, I think, of actually acknowledging the indicators. Like, I think when we look back, we kind of go, okay, I can see the indicators, hindsight. But in the
definitely.
moment, I think the fear of slowing down, of having to reckon with those indicators and what they might be trying to tell us causes at least people like me to double down and be like, I can figure it out. I can muscle through this. I'll be okay. And so, yes, there were lots of indicators, all the ones you shared, that I unwittingly, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was an unconscious decision to ignore or try to circumvent those indicators.
Yeah. For me during that time, it was interesting. Some of these I didn't totally connect with, but the biggest one was I actually was really good at resting during this season. I think my personality type tends to sink into rest a lot easier. And so I actually slept a lot to try to cope with the stress I was undergoing. And stress really felt like an escape from the big emotions that were inside that I didn't know how to deal with. And didn't know how to resolve, and the mind games that were playing in my head, whether it be like negative self-talk or just like the constant anxiety that was going in my head. And so like I joke, but I literally napped for like 10 years every day. Like if my kids were not, up and about and I wasn't on for them being
Yeah.
this good mom, then I was sleeping because I couldn't handle that quiet and it was overwhelming. And that was one of the biggest ways that I coped. Um, but I had a lot of social anxiety during that time. So even though I needed connection and community, I would reach out, but then it would cause a lot of anxiety and I would kind of pull back. And that was really hard for me to really grow friendships during that time. But so what did this just push through season look like for you?
Yeah.
Can you give us some context of like what was going on for you during that time and what that looked like?
Yeah. I think I did not sleep. Sleep was not a form of recovery during that time. I actually probably stayed up later, got up earlier, burning the candle at both ends. Just before I jump into my context, you bring up a good point. I think when we're navigating stress, anxiety, pressure in life, I think we all have probably some healthy coping mechanisms, right? Um, that we leverage to try and manage through the difficulties. But then I also think if the stress persists long enough, it's kind of like an athlete. Like eventually our muscles give out,
Yeah.
and our ability to leverage healthy coping mechanisms it no longer works. And so that's when I think we start turning to less healthy coping mechanisms that can get us in trouble. But I think differentiating between those two, right? Like some coping mechanisms are actually really healthy and serve us.
Yeah.
And knowing how to differentiate between the healthy ones, the unhealthy ones. Because I think even with healthy coping mechanisms, like all human beings have a bandwidth. We will, if we persist under prolonged stress and pressure, we all eventually have a breaking point. And so for me, my context was, my wife and I were leading an organization. We had come in to try and rehabilitate, resuscitate the life of this organization that was struggling. And, and it was years of fighting all these battles and trying to figure this stuff out. And so for me, I had learned up to that point how to operate fairly well under a lot of pressure. I would suggest it was probably 6 years of continued drama, difficulty. And what happened for me was I think I got to the place where my bandwidth ran out. And that's what I never could recognize. And so healthy coping mechanisms slowly drifted into unhealthy coping mechanisms. And part of it, I prided myself in my ability to operate well under a lot of pressure. That was a part of my sense of identity and the value that I brought to this organization. But at the same time, I had no clue to how to identify where my bandwidth ended and where I started running on fumes, and then eventually led to burnout and flame out. The only thing I can say is I think for a lot of people, oftentimes we don't know how to identify when we've reached burnout until after the fact.
Yes.
Because if you've never, it's like, how long can you run? You don't know how far you can run until you try to run as far as you can run.
Yes.
And so it's not until you get to that point where you realize, oh crud, my body's breaking down. I can no longer run. Yeah. And so I also say that because I think for a lot of us, there's so much shame and guilt involved when we hit burnout. And I think there's an opportunity there to recognize you don't know where burnout is until you burn out sometimes. And then we learn from that experience, which gives us now maybe some greater clarity to avoid that same kind of burnout in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for me, I was, a stay-at-home mom during that time with little ones. My husband was traveling a lot, and I think what propelled me into just keep pushing through is a lot of my identity was really wrapped in being a good mom and being a good wife, which I thought, growing up, that what that looked like is me somewhat doing what my husband wanted to do. I would share my opinion, but if he decided that was not the best way, I would just go with it. And a lot of people pleasing and a lot of fear of conflict, deep fear of
Mm,
conflict. And
yeah.
so to keep the peace and to keep everybody happy around me, which was really a sign that I was succeeding at my job as a wife and a mom,
Right.
was to kind of sacrifice myself many times throughout the day in conversations, in a lot of decisions, to really keep going and to keep my kids happy and to be the mom that's fun and has the energy to go through the day. And so that was really what propelled me. So when I hit burnout, it was really scary because I didn't have anything to give. And so all of a sudden, everything that I find pride in, I cannot do anymore. And it feels like an absolute utter failure.
Oof.
Um, yeah. Did you experience anything like that? Like any beliefs or values that really
Oh yeah.
kept you pushing through during that time?
Yeah. This phrase came to mind as you were sharing that, and I really resonate with it, which is, you know, what happens when our understanding of our self-worth
Hmm.
is competing with our understanding of self-care,
Yes.
right? And so
Hmm.
sometimes trying to live into our sense of what gives us worth causes us to compromise our ability to care
Hmm.
for ourselves, right? And we
Yeah.
think by living into our identity, our sense of what value we bring to any context, we think by living into that, that's what's actually going to help us and give us energy and make life feel satisfied or fulfilled, and
Yeah.
only to realize at some point, oh no, I've sacrificed the wrong thing.
Hmm.
So, anyways, yes, I do really connect with that because, like I said as a moment ago, so much of my sense of self worth and identity was wrapped up in I am a strong, resilient um, uh, leader who can endure a lot of stress, pressure, difficult decisions, situations. I mean, when we were running this organization, it was right in the midst of COVID and all of the kind of social race dynamics going on around the country, and
Yeah.
the political atmosphere was just, on fire during that time. And add more issues, involved in that. And so all of those different external pressures, putting a lot of pressure on us as an organization and on our leadership.
Hmm.
um, I think my desire to prove that I was who I believed I was,
Hmm.
there's a lot of irony in that statement. My desire to prove that I was who I believed I was to
Yeah.
the people around me, I think caused me to develop blind spots, that made it very difficult to recognize the indicators that in the beginning were these little small, what I call signposts saying, hey, be aware, you're starting to fatigue. Hey, be aware, you're starting to burn out. But made it very difficult for me to recognize those and to pay them any
Hmm.
attention
Hmm.
because I was so afraid that by slowing down, by taking more rest, by taking time off, by going on more vacations, I was afraid that that would actually signal to people around me that I wasn't as strong or I wasn't as capable of a leader as I wanted people to think I was.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you mentioned before that one of those propellers and beliefs and values was really like supporting your wife during that time. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I think that's something that husbands really deal with, whether it be like wanting to support the family financially and kind of pushing through there. But tell us a little about this, 'cause I think yours is kind of really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, that's for sure. And I'm just going to caveat by saying I don't know how much of what I'm about to share is a healthy viewpoint or a good viewpoint. I just know it was mine during the season, which is when my wife and I moved back to Southern California to take over this organization. At that time, it was a church organization. And so, in that context, um, there wasn't a lot of room for women to step into significant roles of leadership. And for any listeners out there who've been involved in any kind of religious church type context, they'll maybe understand and appreciate what I'm saying. And our goal was to change the culture, and which the leaders that invited us to come into that church had agreed. Yes, we want to shift our culture. We want to make more room for women to step into significant, prominent roles of leadership. So part of my goal during that season, pardon me, was to pave that path for my wife, because she is one of the most powerful people and one of the most powerful leaders I've ever known.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like I was on a mission to make a statement or to prove something to, the larger, broader context. It was more about wanting to see my wife, who I love dearly, who I believe in deeply, to see her have an opportunity to express who she is in a way that would not only fulfill her, but would also really benefit the people that we were leading at that time.
Yeah.
And so that journey for me led into a lot of difficulties, challenges, lots of hard conversations, because as any leader knows, to shift culture is an incredibly difficult and it usually takes a lot longer than we would hope for. And so it's what you think might be a sprint, you suddenly realize is a marathon. You run really hard the first couple of miles, and now you go, oh my gosh, I've still got 20 plus miles to run. But for me, I got to mile 18 in that journey, did make a lot of headway, but eventually started to run into just the fatigue, the burnout, I guess you could say. And probably the most difficult component of a season of burnout is not just recognizing that we're burning out, but it's also recognizing the impact that our burnout now is having, not just on us, but on how we're operating and engaging other people.
Yeah.
And so ironically, in my desperate desire to empower my wife, I found that under stress and all the pressure, I was actually starting to mishandle her in that season. And I found myself increasingly grumpy and angry with her and impatient and irritated. And so the very thing I was fighting for, which was to empower her, in some ways, because I was unaware of where I was at in that time, I was actually operating in counterproductive ways.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I've heard you say this before. It's like, really, we need to change the way that we do it rather than, always changing what we're doing specifically. And I love that you say that, because I think as we look back, we could have done the same things in a different way and been more successful and not burned out in the midst of it. And so did you feel like that empowering your wife was, and the way that you did it was the expectations of Candy, or did you feel like those were self-imposed expectations that were kind of pushing you forward?
That's a really good question. I think probably at times, I felt some pressure from her. And I'm not suggesting that she was trying to apply pressure to me, but just in our conversations, as she was having to struggle through all of this, the challenges and difficulties of dealing with a board and a culture that was not making room for her in the way she wanted. She's going through her own struggles. Yeah. I would say I probably more took on her struggles, on her frustration, and probably in unhealthy ways made it my responsibility to solve those problems for her. Yeah. And of course, that was born out of love and a desire to help her. But I probably took those on inappropriately, and which probably also caused me to, at times, push harder and faster than was helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. I think like the expectations we have for ourselves can be so high, and we're not aware of it because we're just like, this is the next step into like succeeding and making our goal. And when we stop and think about the expectations we have, it's a lot of perfectionism. It's a lot of, I just got to do it and things will be okay, is what it feels like in the moment, not realizing that, hey, this is not healthy for me or the people
Yes.
around me at all. Definitely. So
Can I,
thanks for
can I just
sharing.
throw one little thing in there? I want to play
Yeah.
off of that phrase that you referenced earlier. In my new book, that's a phrase that I've written, which is sometimes we're so concerned with what we're trying to accomplish, we lose sight of how we're trying to accomplish it,
Yeah.
which in and of itself is an incredible form of irony. And I would suggest that in that season, my desire to create space for my wife to feel empowered and positioned appropriately, I lost sight of how I was doing that.
Yeah.
And then sadly, through that process, I think contributed to bringing my marriage to the brink of divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And I start my new book with the words from my wife's mouth, Eric, I want a separation.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Like, do you know all I've been trying to fight for and how I've been trying
Yeah.
to help you and empower you and all that I've been doing for you? But I'd lost sight of how I was operating and
Yeah.
how my trying to help her was actually harming her because I had lost sight of how I was operating,
Yeah.
which is crazy that we fight for things that we think are so important
I know.
and then sacrifice on that altar the things that actually matter far more to us.
I know. I know. It's crazy. And I think part of it is the stress that we kind of lose our brain a little. We lose our ability to make sense of things logically. And we are just kind of like reacting a lot, which is what I talk about a lot with my clients is we don't want to just react to life. We want to respond. And in those moments of high stress, we cannot respond. We can only react in the moment and not really think long term and make decisions based on what's best for our goals, but
Yeah.
really in the moment. And so I want to go into the second phase a little, which I feel like starts with that moment of burnout. And I think a lot of the people that I've talked to so far have this actual moment in time where sometimes it's marked by a physical, like your body is just like not having it anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be, a relational breakdown and maybe both of them at once. But tell me what that moment of burnout looked like for you, and how you responded.
I was driving home from Los Angeles back to San Diego where I live, and it's about a 2-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on this long stretch through Camp Pendleton, a Marine base, which is just this beautiful, the freeway is right along the coast. And it's normally my favorite part of the drive, which is, one of the only reasons I tolerate driving to Los Angeles because it's terrible driving up there. But I'm driving home and I was thinking about all the stuff going on in our lives. And I found that I couldn't breathe.
Hmm.
I started to feel like my brain was shutting down. I don't know how else to explain it. Like I was like losing peripheral vision. And I thought, oh my gosh, something's wrong with me. I'm gonna have a heart attack. That's how it felt. Um, it got to the point where I could not physically drive, at least in any safe way, and had to pull over off the side of the freeway.
Hmm.
And as I pulled over and I brought my car to a stop, it was like uncontrollable. I just started bawling. And I didn't know why I was bawling. I couldn't explain anything that was happening. I just knew that it was like this uncontrolled burst of emotion in my mind and emotions in my physical body. Everything just was like something is not okay.
Yeah.
And it took me probably 20 minutes to recover on the side of the road before I could calm down enough to find my way back home. And then I had probably 4 or 5 similar episodes. Not always of the same magnitude, but similar episodes where I would find myself in a meeting with the board of our organization, or I'd find myself in a conversation with my wife, or I'd find myself sometimes just doing things that were, meaningless. But
Yeah.
out of nowhere, I would feel my chest just completely constrict. I couldn't breathe. My mind would go into scramble mode. And And it took actually talking to a trusted friend who said, Eric, those are anxiety attacks. And I remember thinking, anxiety attacks? I don't have anxiety attacks. That's not what I do. I've never had an anxiety attack before.
Yeah.
Um, and, but that was the wake up call. That was the beginning of realizing I feel broken. I feel like my mind, my emotions, my body are not working appropriately. And it was like the smallest little thing that could put me into that space. And that was terrifying because for so many years I prided myself in my ability to navigate very difficult situations with sobriety and clarity and with, a sense of rationality. And here I was just, at any given moment falling apart. And it felt so vulnerable. I felt so weak. It was terrifying. I felt so scared because I didn't understand why this was happening to me. And that kind of was the wake up call to like, I need help.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yes, definitely scary. I mean, I connect with a lot of that personally. I also had a similar situation where a lot of the stress that revolved in my life during that time was a lot of relational conflict with me and my husband, of a lot of unhealthy habits that we had that we weren't taking care of and didn't know how to take care of. And we were just kind of like, one
Oh,
day it'll get better. And
yeah.
that's kind of how I made sense of it too. And so, he had a lot of opportunities for work in other states. And so he would bring up moving a lot, which I found over time that change for me is extremely exhausting and overwhelming. And it just drains me so much. So we were in a Winco parking lot one night, arguing, having a conversation, trying to make sense of how finances were going to work. And he brings up this idea of, moving again, which just sent me into an utter panic attack. And I had a few prior to this. And so it was scary. They usually happen when he wasn't around, and I would kind of be at home without him, which I was dealing with the kids. So I just put them on the TV and I was in bed for like 3 hours recovering from this anxiety attack. But in this moment, it was really unique and so special because I got out of the car and I'm bawling, like hyperventilating. I can't breathe. I'm just hoping no one sees me and doesn't come to help because I cannot talk in this moment. And it was very, very scary. And I didn't know what to do. I kind of reached the end of myself, like very helpless, very scary, very weak. And in the midst of me crying and hyperventilating and breathing so loud, I just hear God speak like so clearly. And he says, you can say no. And then a series of really quick memories pop up in my brain, probably 10 of them, of moments in my life where if I would have said no during those times, I wouldn't be in this position now. And
wow.
It was crazy because if you've ever tried to hear God in your most stressful moments, it's really hard to. And it almost, I don't expect it anymore almost, because it's like, of course, I'm just so overwhelmed in my brain, I cannot hear. And so it was so special to hear that, because a lot of what was driving me in that season was this belief that me not saying no was actually benefiting the people around me and supporting them. And I was doing what God called me to do. And so to hear him say, you can say no, I was like, what? That almost seems unbiblical to me. Please explain more. He did not. But in that moment, what it did for me is all of the experiences I was having that I was blaming my husband for, like, we're in this mess because of you and your issues, or the things that you're not wanting to, tackle at that time. God was like, nope, you're here because of you, and you actually have power to change it. And that was, as much as it was hard to hear that, it was like, wow, okay, if you just showed me memories where I could have said no and not been in this moment, that means I could have actually felt peace right now. I could have learned to set boundaries and been more honest. And so it was a crazy moment for me. And still I had no idea how to do any of that. It was just more like, wow, I have to take responsibility for where I put myself. And that was really crappy to realize I was there because of me and not because of anybody around me. So that was an early moment for me, and it changed everything.
It's interesting hearing you share this. It's actually really helpful whenever I get to talk with somebody who's had similar experiences, because in your experience, I hear and even can make sense, even sometimes more of my own experience. For me as a Christian leader, so I'm a pastor of a church at this point.
Yeah.
And as a Christian leader, the expectation is you figured it all out. You've got it all together. Like, you've got the special red telephone to God. You hear God in every moment, you have it sorted. And I think in that season of all these anxiety attacks, all that did was to further heap shame and the coals of guilt and self-condemnation onto myself. But what's interesting is, in a very similar way, and for me, even though I had at that point spent years coaching people in the area of personal responsibility, because it's so easy just to blame everybody in the world around us for why our life sucks.
Yeah.
In that moment, under so much pressure and feeling so disoriented, I was really struggling to practice personal responsibility. And it took me going to a counselor, therapist, to begin the process of realizing how over that season I had, without even realizing it, had begun to project blame and responsibility onto all of these different parties: the board, the staff, my wife, my kids, my friends, my family, my extended family. Everybody was the reason why I was under so much stress.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't until I was able to, kind of like you, have this moment of like, wow, you know what? I'm the one that keeps putting myself in these positions. I'm the one that's making choices that is the reason why I find myself under so much stress and pressure. I'm the one that's not practicing healthy self-care. I'm the one who is doing this to myself. And it's such a difficult thing for me. And I'm sure, all the clients I work with over the years have resonated with this, but it's just so difficult to really accept that very often, especially as adults, right? When we're little kids, like a lot of crap's happening to us that we're way out of control of. But as we kind of grow into our adult years, and to be able to accept that very often so much of the pain that we're experiencing in life has a lot more to do with our decisions, whether it's a lack of boundaries, right? The inability to say no, or operating under unhealthy expectations. But it's not until we can wake up to that and say, gosh, you know what? I can actually make choices that would lead to a far more peaceful, healthy life, is really difficult, because we don't want to be responsible for what we're experiencing. We want everybody else to be responsible.
Yeah, it feels safer in that moment. But really, if we think about it, it is a way better scenario if we have control over what's going on than just assuming we are victims to our circumstances and the people around us. And so, as hard that is to understand, I'm so glad that God spoke in that moment and put that responsibility back on me, because it meant that things could change from that moment. I didn't have to wait any longer for my season to change or my husband to change. And it actually did. So, hi, I hope you're enjoying this episode. In case you don't know, I am a life coach with Fortify Coaching, and I help people create one small change at a time that creates sustainable rhythms in their life. And if you're connecting with anything in this episode, reach out to me for a free chemistry call. You can do this by going to my website, fortifyandgrow.com, and click on that contact button. You can also check out my downloads, which helps you incorporate rest and gratitude in your life, and sign up for my newsletter, which will have tips and tricks that may not be in this podcast. So anyways, thanks for listening, and let's get back to the good stuff. After that moment that you had, what were some really small things that you did to not only rest, but bring you peace and joy. Because one of the things I talk a lot about with my clients is making one small change at a time. And that the smallest things we do every day have the biggest impact. You know, we're so tempted to kind of hurry and plan a big vacation and that be the thing that we hope brings us rest and renewal and new vision. And really, it's the day in, day out, little small changes that we make. So, what were some of those changes for you that you made right away that helped you in this recovery?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's kind of like whenever we decide, I want to get more fit, I want to lose weight, and then we go to the gym for 4 hours one day, and we're like, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first, if I can remember correctly, the first thing that I did that was so powerful but so small was to give myself permission to be in the space I was,
Mm-hmm.
and to not judge myself and to condemn myself, but to fully accept, for better and for worse, this is where I'm at right now. This is where I'm at mentally, emotionally, physically, relationally, spiritually. This is where I'm at. And giving myself permission to be where I was at. The reason it was so powerful is because I didn't realize how little permission I had given to myself to be experiencing all of this difficulty.
Yeah.
And to not have answers and to not know how to solve certain problems. And I think part of the journey into self-care, healthy self-care, is practicing brutal honesty with what's going on for us mentally, emotionally, physically, and to not judge ourselves, but to accept, for better or for worse, this is where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Because, a little phrase that I remind myself all the time is you can't change what you can't see. And so often we're afraid to see what's really going on. And so we have no chance at actually beginning to make changes that would be helpful. The second thing I remember doing was reaching out for help. I don't know how to deal with where I'm at. And it's scary, pardon me, disorientating, and I need help. And here I had spent so many years, I'm the one who helps other people, right? I'm a leader. I help others.
Yeah.
I help them solve their problems. And I think there's a great degree of humility that has to be practiced in reaching out and saying, I need help. Yeah. And asking for help does not disqualify me from the role or position I'm in.
Yeah, totally.
I have to remind leaders all the time. I work with high-level executives who run massive multi-billion-dollar corporations. And when they're in this space, I think there's this deep fear that if I acknowledge how messed up I feel right now, and if I reach out and ask for help and anybody finds out, it's going to disqualify me from continuing on in this role or this position. So reaching out for help, and obviously finding a therapist and I had to cycle through a few therapists, by the way. I always tell people, don't be okay you might have to try out a few different therapists to find the one that works for you. And then probably the third thing was bringing those people closest to me into that space, not so that they could solve it for me, but just, I'm a big believer that we're not meant to live life alone. And the more pressure and the more difficulties we're in, oftentimes we start to, without even realizing it, isolate, withdraw from the relationships we need most. And it wasn't because I needed them to solve anything. It's because I needed to remember that I, wasn't a bad person for struggling, that people loved me, that people valued me for who I was, regardless of what I was going through, but also because I needed to know that I didn't need to do it alone.
Yeah.
And I just needed to know that I was a part of a community, a family, a group of friends, people who saw me in the midst of my struggle and still valued and believed in me. And I needed that support to, I think, have the courage to then enter into the process of healing and reconciling different elements within myself. And then also the third part of this recovery process, which, I'm sure we'll get to, which is now that I've realized I'm in this situation and I'm waking up to it and looking to make sure that I'm going through a process of personal recovery. The third element was then, oh my gosh, now what do I do as I look around and realize all the collateral damage that I've caused because I spent so much time operating in unhealth.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, let's just jump into that one, because I think that one is it's interesting. You brought it up to me and I was like, I don't think I connect with that one. That's not part of my story. And the more that I thought about it over the last few days, I was like, actually, I do totally, but it looked so different than the typical. A lot of it, I think, was mending relationship with myself, to be honest, because I had really, this sounds extreme, but I really abandoned myself multiple times every day, all day, for the sake of, everyone around me. And I thought that was good. And I had a lot of pride in it. So prioritizing myself and honoring my needs and my wants, I didn't even know what I needed and what I wanted at that time. So it literally started with finding out what I need and what I want. And it would literally take me hours at home with the kids. I would, just sit doing dishes and be like, what do you need right now? And it would take me hours. I finally concluded I needed to just get out of the house and do something that I wanted to do, because I wasn't used to that. And so it looked like, hobbies, like taking a sewing class and, volunteering in different places and just exploring me again and prioritizing me. And it felt very selfish. I joke with my husband, but this phase was, I call the FU season of our marriage. Because, and you could think it would look terrible, because I was so ingrained in feeling like I was selfish and deeply afraid of being selfish. It looked more like just brutal honesty in our marriage. But it felt like I had to stop caring for what he needed or wanted. I needed a season of him taking care of himself and not having the pressure or the strain to be there for him emotionally any longer. And so it was a long season of, I don't care what you think or want. Here's what I think. I'm fine with having a conversation about it, but I'm going to be extremely brutally honest and we can't do this anymore the way that we've done it, So, what did that reconciliation time for you look like? The clean up the mess phase?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was taking space to do two things. One was to take a personal inventory of all of the contexts or relationships that I could by myself identify, gosh, I've not handled this person, or I've not been treating this person well, or I've not been attentive to this individual, or I've not called my mom or dad in months and months and months and months. So I think there's part of that we can do on our own. Like, we can look around and go, yeah, I've not handled these people or these situations or made these decisions well. And then doing the hard work of trying our best to make amends and to repair those different dynamics. And then there's what I would say, for me at least, has been the harder part of this reconciliation process, which is going and asking the people that I spend time with in my life. I want to hear from you how you've experienced me. I want to hear for you where you may have been adversely affected by my attitudes and behaviors during that season. Let me give you one example. I'm in Nashville with a client. We've been working all day together. And as I often do, I become friends with my clients. And so a lot of times I end up staying in their homes when I'm traveling, which is one of my favorite things.
That's cool.
Yeah, because then you get the conversation after the conversation, right? The meeting between the meetings.
Yeah.
So this evening, we'd had dinner with his family, and it's just him and I sitting around talking. And, he asked me, hey, how are you doing? I know you've been through a lot, and it's been a tough season. How are you doing? And I told him, I'm doing a lot better, but I want to ask you a question. I've been working with you through this entire season that I was going through, because I had a coaching business as well as the leading of the church. And I said, I want to hear from you how you've experienced me during this time, and if there's any ways that you've been adversely impacted by me. And he said, Eric, I'm really grateful that you asked. He said, I know that you've stopped drinking. He said, and I'm really grateful for that, because when you've come to my home, your drinking was slowly becoming an issue for my wife. Because when you were in our home, you would drink too much, and just not to the place of being belligerent, but she could just feel that you shifted in your kind of way you would handle us and conversations. And she started to feel a little unsafe. And I remember battling through the immediate feelings of shame and guilt and self-condemnation, but being able to get past that and to hear what he was sharing, and just simply say, first, thank you for bringing that to my attention. And secondly, I'm so sorry. And I was able to then apologize to his wife the following day, to let her know how sad I was by how they had experienced me during that couple years, and to do my best. And thankfully, in that situation, they were super gracious and forgiving. And obviously, I had stopped drinking at that point, and so it was kind of providing new data points to rebuild trust with them.
Yeah.
But I also have to share that there were relationships during that season that were irreparable, where they may have forgiven me for some of my attitudes and behaviors and how I handled them, but the depth of those relationships did change.
Yeah.
And I had to accept that as well. That sometimes, the consequences of our behaviors can be mended, and you can repair and maybe even make the relationship even stronger. But there are times, and it's painful, when we have to reckon with lost relationships, and we have to look back and say, gosh, part of that loss has to do with the fact that I was not operating well in that season. So anyways, I'm just throwing that out because I'm sure there are some listeners out there that are like,
totally,
dang it.
Totally. I think that, yeah, definitely. Especially if it goes on for an extremely long period of time, years on end, without making an adjustment, that can be really hard. So what did that look like for you and Candy?
Well, it looked like, kind of like you said, if you went through your FU season, like I have to really start taking care of myself. Mine was not, I have to start taking care of myself. That was a part of it. But there was so much hurt and pain, and not just on her part, on both of our parts, because we were both in this messy season. So we both had our own part to play in it. But I think for us, there was so much pain and hurt that we had probably unintentionally caused each other during that time. Whether we were accurate in our assessment of what hurt us or not, we both had a lot of hurt and pain. And so it took a long time, because while I'm trying to sift through myself and reconcile things with myself and go through this whole process we've been talking about, I think there had been enough trust broken between us that it took months and months and months and months and months till we were able to get to the point where we realized or recognized our marriage is on the brink of ending.
Yeah.
And if we don't make some radical adjustments, then we're in big trouble. Because I would love to say that, I had the anxiety attacks, I went to a counselor, and everything was better. Like, I found a new version of myself, and I, grew, and it that did happen, but it took months and months and months and months to go through that process. And so in that process, we're still operating out of old habits and defaults and coping mechanisms that just continue to heap pain on top of pain. And I'm so grateful because the book I just wrote, which begins with her words, Eric, I want a separation, was the kind of wake up call for me to be like, okay, if I don't prioritize my marriage over everything else in my life, I will lose my marriage.
Hmm.
And I had this moment, like this epiphany of like, if I lose my marriage, it just feels like that's the one sacrifice I am not willing to make.
Yeah.
So if I lose everything else to save my marriage 20 years from now, would I think it's worth it? And for me personally, the answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was for me the moment of like, okay, we need to start leveraging all of our resources to do our best, to make our best attempt at finding a way forward together. And that's when we launched again into a season of marriage counseling, which has been, and again, it took us cycling through some different therapists before we found someone who has just been incredibly helpful for us in creating a space where we can begin to sift through all the rubble of what we've been through. Because it's not just the pain that we've caused each other. We both have so much heartache and pain from just that season of life and all we experienced and all the difficulties. But to actually create some safe space for us to work through some of that, to begin to learn some new skills, things that we hadn't learned over the last 20 plus years that, you always think, okay, I've learned this. Now I won't struggle with this the rest of my life. And then you get 5 years down the road and you're like, here I am again in the same issue. Like, no, this is just an opportunity to learn this at a deeper level. So I think for us, it was creating that space to say, okay, like we gotta give this everything. And to be quite honest, we're still in that process. Mm-hmm. Like we were just in a counseling session the other day that, didn't feel like it was going well. And then, and we're still battling through recovering our marriage and rebuilding trust and learning new ways of operating that are hopefully setting a new foundation for the future that we both believe in.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I started going to counseling. We both started going together, but there were times he was out of town, so I would go on my own. And there was one session in particular that she was telling me, why haven't you told your husband this? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. I can't be that honest with him. And she was like, you need to. And in that moment, I knew I had to, but it took me a few days. But I had to tell him, I think that if something doesn't change immediately, we are going to have to separate. And I knew that was going to come at a very big shock to him because of all of the things that I had been holding inside and not being honest about and putting on a smiley face to get through the day because he was in a stressful season himself and didn't really need an added, hey, guess what? You need to stop things and prioritize our marriage. I knew that was going to, that conflict alone would be a lot for me to deal with. And, but luckily he responded really well and leaned into it. And, that was in 2017 is when it all came down for us. And it has been a really long process. Some of it started in counseling. And then over the years, there's been things that I have leaned into personally that, whether it be, a coaching type situation or books I'm reading or podcasts or like things I'm leaning in to get healthier and to really overcome those things that are keeping us from connecting. And a lot of it for me was getting to know myself, and it was still walking that, honoring myself, walking that out every day. So that's been a long process for that too. But as he's also leaned in to different coaching experiences, and there's been some podcasts that have been really, really pivotal in his life. Luckily we got through, and every year was better and better and better. And we just had a conversation last night where we were like, he's like, I feel like my life is every day is the best day ever, because it's like every day we're growing, and it's way better than anything we've experienced so far. And so as we continue to press in and get more out of life and grow, like our marriage is better. Like we are so happy now. We didn't realize that we did not feel like we were friends. We never felt like we were friends, actually, even
Right.
dating. And so a couple years ago, we had this moment of like, wow, I think we're friends now.
Yeah.
Like, and now we're like, you're my best friend. And I'm like, we
I
always
love
heard
that.
people talk about that before. And we were like, I don't connect with that. Like, how do you get to that place, you know? Um, and so, but it does take time and a lot of patience and a lot of pacing yourself,
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to be a process. So knowing like, hey, I can't expect change overnight from him. And so how am I going to take care of myself? How am I
Yeah.
going to have some correct expectations out of him so that we are not burning out before we all have a chance to grow into who we're supposed to be? And that was really pivotal to know that this is a process. And
Mm.
instead of just holding on till things change and then one moment expecting it to change,
Yeah.
know that, hey, this is a process. And as long as I'm honest about where we're going,
Yeah.
and take care of myself, I'm going to be able to sustain all of those seasons.
The journey of, like you were saying, this journey of discovering a new way to be married. I heard a friend recently say, I was sharing something about my marriage, and he goes, well, I don't know if it helps you, but like I'm on my 8th marriage now. And I remember like it shocked me. I was like, wait, I know your
Yeah.
wife. What do you mean you're on your 8th marriage? Like you've been married 8 times? And he said, no, 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 you don't understand. He said, I've been married to the same woman for, I think at this point it was like 48 years. He's a little older gentleman that I play golf with. He said, your marriage, just like you as human beings, is going to evolve and transform. And you're going to discover new iterations of who you are as a human being, of a variety of different times through your life. And it's okay for your marriage to evolve and to have to discover new iterations. So when I hear you talking about how you and your husband are discovering friendship in your marriage, right? And discovering new ways of connecting and new enjoyment. That's so powerful, because that's what I think I'm holding on to in my own marriage is now I can say, oh, I've been married like 4 or 5 times. Like my wife and I have had to reiterate our marriage, whether it was from when we were dating to engaged to getting married, then to having kids, and then to living in different parts of the country and having different jobs and roles and responsibilities, and whether we work together or separate. And I'm really hoping that this journey for us is going to unlock a new marriage, a new way of engaging, a new way of enjoying one another that, quite frankly, we couldn't get to without passing through all of those other seasons of growth and transformation. And so just hearing what you and Kyler are experiencing is very inspiring and encouraging for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I love that as we go through talk about these different phases, our stories are so almost opposite. And I just love that no matter what story it is, burnout has these same themes for people, because we can really connect on those things and realize that we're not alone when we hit this spot. And I think there's many reasons why we hit that spot. But when we do, it is the opportunity to help us be better and to see all of the unhealthy habits and mindsets and beliefs that we have that we need to let go of in order to be who God created us to be and to do what he called us to do. And so what looks like chaos and a terrible, terrible, traumatic moment is actually a moment that has so much opportunity for change and promise and hope in the midst of the chaos, you know?
Yes. I love that. If you don't mind, this would be a great moment for me to promo my new book called Transform Your Trajectory. The subtitle is How to Turn Your Most Challenging Moments into Life-Changing Breakthroughs. In this book, I introduce a tool that you were introduced to almost 20 years ago. When we were working
by you.
Yep, a long time ago. But the passion in writing this book is because that's life, right? It's constantly learning to wake up and to recognize the moments of our life. Sometimes they're really positive moments, sometimes they're really painful moments, but nonetheless, recognizing that those experiences are if we can flip the script and see them as opportunities to learn, to grow, to experience transformation. And in this book, there's a simple tool that helps people do this on a regular basis, so that we don't have to wait until everything falls apart to wake up to stuff. But our ability to do that, I think, in my mind, is what separates people like you from somebody else. Like your willingness to say, hey, I'm never going to arrive. I'm never going to have figured it all out in life. So I'm going to accept that in different seasons, I'm going to have to wake up to some new difficulty, some new challenge, and I'm going to see it. I'm going to choose to see it as an opportunity to go on a growth journey. Where a lot of people, I think, we get to the point where we get tired of that journey and we say, you know what? I'll wait till the world around me changes to fit my expectations, my needs, rather than to seize the opportunity to become a better version of ourselves. So anyways, your story is a perfect case study of what I write about in this book.
Yeah, seriously. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And can you let us know how our listeners can connect with you if they want to reach out to you for coaching or, buy some of your books, and what is your website?
Or just a conversation.
Yes.
Right. So the obviously people can find us on all of our social medias. It's MPWR Coaching. Or you can go to mpwrcoaching.com. That's our website where we have all of our resources. We have opportunities to connect for free phone calls. We love just chatting with people, hearing where people are at, what they're experiencing. Not because we think we can help everybody, but we just love to participate in their journey. And if we can recommend somebody who can be helpful or some resources, we love doing that. And just a small reminder to your listeners that our coaching business, yes, we believe wholeheartedly that the tools that we've developed and the way that we work with leaders is incredibly effective. It moves the needle. And yet it's also really important to understand that we do not consider ourselves experts as much as committed practitioners. Yeah. And so we coach, we lead, we speak out of the overflow of our own journeys. And, somebody said the other day, why would you talk about the difficulties of your marriage in your new book? Doesn't that make, won't that make people think less of you? And I just said, I want to operate in a way that models permission for other people to struggle and to reach out for help and to know that that's part of the human journey. So.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you.
Likewise,
and
Krystal.
I hope to see you soon.
Likewise.
Okay. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode today. I have a free gift for you. It is a guide of 8 ways to incorporate rest into your busy life. You can find it on fortifyandgrow.com under downloadables, and I hope it's helpful. Have a great day.